In this video, we'll be going over how to manage your sidebar. With what we have in the demo local site here, we'll be essentially recreating what's already there. Something like the Facebook button, where it's an image with a link, and the embedded social media timeline. So to get started, you'll need to be logged in and starting out on your link's homepage. The sidebar content is the area under your search bar. And if you have a red and blue site, it is under the donate button under the search bar. And to manage that section of your site, it's done through your homepage. So create a new draft or edit the existing draft of your homepage to reach the sidebar. Once the editing form loads up, the sidebar content is located under the body. So scroll past the body of the homepage to where you have these collapsed sections here. Click to expand the sidebar content, and we see the Facebook button that I have there currently, and we may not be able to tell that this is the Instagram, but this is the full HTML version. If I swap this to the WYSIWYG text editor translates that HTML code and presents it as the Instagram timeline. Whenever you're working with a widget like this, you are using HTML code, so you need to leave that set to full HTML. What we'll do is leave what's there and add to it, add another button here for social media, and I'll add another timeline under the Instagram. But let's get started up here. With the image, I can add it just to the same line by making a space, or add it to its own line by hitting enter or return. Using the media browser icon, that will bring up by default, my upload page, but I want to use a social media button. Most of the time, those are already going to be in the media library. There's probably more than a few to choose from when it comes to any type of social media. So let's go with Twitter. I can narrow down the type so that I'm only seeing images and hit apply. With just those two, I've narrowed it down, and you can always zoom in to see these results a bit better. But let's go with something simple. As soon as you select your item, you can submit or double click that item and you'll be taken to this next page. For the display as option, go ahead and leave that as full content. You'll get a chance to resize it on the next page. The alt text will show up if the image doesn't show up properly, or if a visually impaired visitor is using a screen reader. The title will show up for the public when they're hovering with their mouse over the image. And the file description is only available to webmasters. You can ignore the link image. So go ahead and submit once you have everything here set up properly or how you'd like it. And now once you submit, we're brought back to the image that you just chose being dropped into the sidebar content box. If the scrunched box is giving you any trouble here with it being so small, a trick you can do is disable the rich content. Click that. As soon as it is clicked, the text changes and you see that the text box below extends. So now go ahead and click Enable Rich Text, and we're taken back. This time, the text box remains extended. So So now, first thing I want to do is click on my image, and with most internet browsers, you should get this resizing border around the edges. You may have trouble if you're using Mozilla Firefox, but any other browser should, with no issue, present that border. You can shrink and expand that to whatever you like. So whether you go too small, you can always make it bigger. With the image selected still, now is the second step to add the link. Using the insert edit link icon, it's going to bring up a new window. I would most likely have something copied to my clipboard for this, but what I'll do is just choose from one of my previous selections. The target by default is going to open in a new window because it is outside of the Milo family. So I'm going to leave that as the default. The title will show up as, once again, the user hovers over the link. This will be associated with the link, and it will look like it is part of the image as well. So let's go ahead and insert that. We can tell already that when we hover over that, the link title comes up. So the same will happen when after you've saved and you're looking at your front page. So that is how you can create a button. That is the same process wherever you have a WYSIWYG text box. Now let's go down to recreate the same idea of this Instagram feed, but we're going to add a completely new third-party embed code box. You can add to the existing third-party embed code box, but to keep things clean and organized for yourself, we recommend keeping widgets separate. So having its own third-party embed code box for Facebook, for one for Instagram, and one for Twitter, for example. I'm going to open a new window because we have some documentation that is dealing with the social media timelines. So coming over to my documentation page, I'm going to scroll down about halfway so I can search by keyword. If I look up timeline, or I could have looked up social media, either one of those will bring up the social media widgets, Facebook and Twitter timelines documentation. If you haven't already checked this out, it is worth the look, especially if you want to use the embedded timeline, just like we saw with the Instagram. Here is a couple of examples. They're a little large, but this is the kind of same idea of embedding the activity from that social media platform onto your site. So let's go back up, starting with the first steps. I do need to have first, just like I had the Twitter link for the National League, I'm going to use the Facebook link here. And I'm going to open up the Facebook Developers Page plugin. Facebook makes it really easy. All I have to do from this page is replace the Facebook page URL. Once I paste that in, we won't see it update until you click your mouse out of that box anywhere else. By default, the height is going to be quite long. It will just depend on your the rest of the space. So we have the Instagram embedded here. there's a chance that the Facebook timeline might not be as long. But you always have a chance to come back in and play with the height and specify something here if it does come out to be too long. As it is now, I will just leave the width and the height blank because Facebook will do its best to respond to the container that it is in. And that's where that responsiveness comes in. We leave that selected and go ahead and click Get Code. We have two different chunks, but they're fine to go into the same spot. So first, I'm copying the section from step 1, coming back over to my editing form for my home page. I'm going to replace the default text that comes up. And it doesn't matter whether you paste it regularly or as plain text. All right, first chunk in there, going back to the Facebook page plugin, I am copying the second chunk. Coming back to the editing form, I'm doing the same. So with this, after we've plugged this in, do not switch to WYSIWYG. It may edit your HTML, just as we did here with swapping it between. You may not have the same freedom with doing that for your Facebook, or if you chose to add in a Twitter timeline. Being that it is the first paste in, you'll want to leave this as full HTML the whole time. After you've saved this, you can go back and forth between text editors. It's just a matter of saving it the first time to avoid any changing of your code. You don't want to swap it to WYSIWYG. All right, so now I have both of those social media buttons and two of my social media timelines. So let's go down to the bottom. I'm ready to save. Because this is the sidebar content, and actually before I go down to the bottom, the sidebar content along with all of these other collapsed fields, with the exception of the legacy settings, all of these are settings or sections throughout your site that are not just confined to the home page. With that said, because they are site-wide, they do require the moderation state to be set to published. Leaving these changes in draft mode will just make them not visible. They will only remain visible to you as a webmaster when you come into this editing form. So go ahead and publish so that these changes that we just made to the sidebar content will show up after we save. Awesome. So now here we go. And one thing I forgot to mention when we were editing the buttons here, the Facebook button was already centered. And that was using the styles drop down. I centered that. And because I took my cursor from that same spot and started a new line, the center came along with it. So the Twitter button was centered as well. That's just one best practices when you're adding something to the sidebar, because everything else above it is centered. So let's check out the Facebook timeline here below.